So we're in Wyoming for the first time ever.
Right? Elk hunting.
Elk hunting. And we drew a tag that we didn't expect to draw.
For 4 years.
Yeah. Because Wyoming has this cool random draw. And with one preference point, and one person in our party had no preference points. So that kind of made us all no preference points. We drew it. And then you got offered a new job.
It's true.
And you're going to have limited vacation. The new job starts on Tuesday. So we decided that the only vacation time you had to go hunting was the first week of Wyoming archery season, which isn't the best.
True.
Typically, you want to go archery hunting a little bit later in the season where it's a little bit cooler and the rut's kicked in a little bit more.
Started, yep.
So we kind of knew that, you know, this was a difficult challenge. So, nevertheless, we packed up our stuff and drove 10 hours to come up here.
Yeah, it was a hike up here, that's for sure.
And fought a tailwind or a headwind all the way up here. Stopped about every major city to refuel so to connect to the next city.
My truck usually gets around 9 or 10 miles to the gallon pulling the camper, and it got 5.2 miles to the gallon. So quite a bit of wind.
Made it all the way up here. We're up on the Idaho-Wyoming border, on the very western part of Wyoming. And we got up here with one day to scout. So we got our first day of scouting. What was that like?
That was a lot of looking, a little disappointing, but the scenery was spectacular. And I've been in Colorado my whole life, seen forests my whole life, but it's never really seen anything like Wyoming, where it's just so vast and so rugged and so steep in this unit that we're in. And we glassed and glassed and glassed and glassed. I think all we saw was a few deer. So we were a little bit disappointed in all of our illusions of grandeur of Wyoming and all the videos you see with herds of elk everywhere. On all the hills where there's open patches, there were no elk. And we looked for hours. Opening day and several different times through the season we glassed all those hills. Nothing out in the open except for a flock of mountain goats, I believe is what we saw, probably 6 or 7 miles away. And quite a few deer. We ended up seeing quite a few deer, so that was good.
It was really surprising because we used the spotting scope a lot. We drove around. We saw all the different points we e-scouted and all the waypoints we'd saved, so we kind of understood the terrain. But really thought that with the spotting scope and an entire day, we would see elk coming out on some kind of alpine slopes. And wow, no. This really reminds us a lot of Colorado, where elk don't come out of the trees unless it's dark. So
much that confirmed that for sure.
Yeah.
At least this part of the season for sure.
So anyone thinking that Wyoming is some kind of Disneyland, that's not our experience. So, but on our first day of scouting, we were able to find maybe plan A, B, and C.
True. Yeah,
where we were going to go.
We pulled off and we saw a nice deer. You spotted a deer. I don't know how the heck you saw it with your binoculars, and we set up the spotting scope and confirmed it was a deer. We were just messing around watching that deer, and all of a sudden we hear a bugle behind us across the river that's probably 70, 80 yards across. A really big river. And he was up there in those hills, and he just kept answering us. After he bugled, we went ahead and pulled out our bugles, and kind of made us wish we would have been trying to do locate bugles the whole morning, because we'd driven around a lot that morning and didn't expect anything to be bugling, but he bugled, and we found him and located him, marked him on our GPS, and that was a pretty good godsend, because that's ended up where we got all the action in for when we got into the elk several other days. So second day of the season, or first day of the actual season, we chose to go to an area that looked a little bit more promising, because everything else where we heard the bugle was straight up and down and super thick. And we were like, well, let's go check out this other spot where we saw where there were some nice open meadows and hills as far as you could see with patches of timber, patches of clearings. We're like, man, this is sweet. We'll just glass these things. We'll figure out where they're at. So we went to this one area and went up there, and we hiked and hiked and hiked, and that hill got bigger and bigger and bigger. But well, within the first hour and a half, we saw 3 cow elk, and then a little bit later we saw another cow. Muzzleloader or rifle, we could have got any of those really, but then we found out how rugged and steep that is to get off of some of those chutes, and so a little bit disappointed with the outcome of that day, and we had some really sore feet, but we saw some beautiful territory. And so then the second day,
No? Well, I agree with you on the first day. The first day was really open country. It had beautiful pockets of aspens, and on the northern facing slopes it was thick pine ridges, and we thought you could get up in there and that you would be able to, you know, spot and stalk and get up on a hill and glass and maybe see elk move back and forth to those patches of timber. But I think those elk have it figured out where they know little corridors where they never ever escape timber, because we were up there and glassing and we got into, you know, some awesome territory with tons of elk sign. But absolutely, I mean, we glassed all day long. In our experience in Colorado, if you glass all day long, you start seeing animals, whether it's elk or deer or whatever you're hunting, antelope. So we were a little taken back, and after that long journey, and we figured, well, okay, well, we knew that there was a bull that bugled in a place where you couldn't get to him, because that's where elk figure out is the place you can't get to him very easily. And he was behind the river where you'd have to cross the river, and there was no roads around him. But it kind of gave us a general. He was, I think, 2 miles away from the nearest road.
2.5 from the first bridge.
So we found the closest road to him and said, well, that's where we knew an elk was bugling. So that's a good place to start. And we drove up there on the second day, and we parked our truck in the dark and got out. And to our wonderful amazement, stepped out of the truck and was putting our backpacks on, and bugle number 1, bugle number 2, bugle number 3. And we have, you know, onyx to go off of and know where the road goes and where the trail goes. And we were checking the wind, and the wind was blowing right at the elk, and we were like, oh. So we decided to walk down the trail and try to get around the elk and get at least down to their elevation and cut across, so we weren't coming down on top of them where the wind was blowing right to them. And we circled around on that trail and came in and dropped right into a park that we now know a lot better than we did on the first day. Dropped into that park and skirted our little way down. It jumped a moose that we got all excited about, thinking maybe that we busted an elk, and oh my goodness, but no, it was a moose.
Yep.
And then 50 yards after that, we bugled and had 2 answers. We had one to the left and one to the right, and the one to the right was, I never heard anything like that before in my life.
He was massive.
That bull.
We never saw him, but I've been around a lot of elk bugles, and that one sounded like his throat must have been about this big around, because he was just massive.
He never bugled. He just grunted. And it wasn't a growl. It wasn't a chuckle. It was just a grunt. It was just a. It was unbelievable. And we walked in there, and we kept getting closer and closer to him, and we'd bugle, and that other satellite bull would bugle back normal, and he would grunt louder and louder, and it was just like a King Kong just grunt. He was unbelievable. Yeah. And we probably got
some good footage. So check out the footage on that for day 2, and that was pretty impressive.
About 150, 200 yards away from him, and all of a sudden, he was gone. And we hunted out a little bit further, and we heard bugles way down the ridge.
That's true.
So that's when we started thinking, oh, these elk are in here in the morning, and then they go downhill, which is we're mostly used to elk going uphill.
Colorado, they go uphill.
So these elk that morning went downhill, and we thought, okay, well, we got the wind right. We did everything right, but they didn't come in, and we started thinking about needing to be more aggressive, right? And the day number 2, what was day number 2? Can you remember?
Day number 2 was my day to take point, to be the shooter. You were the shooter on the first day.
Yeah.
And we had all these brilliant plans to try to sneak up around them because we thought the wind screwed us up on the first day. So we thought, well, let's go. Well, this is actually day number 3 because day number 1 was when we went to the rugged area. So day number 3.
Day number 3.
We were up there, and I decided to go. We all decided to go and hook around them and try to not have the wind spoil it this time. And so we had active elk bugles right outside the truck, a few hundred yards, and we're like, let's hook up. This road goes all the way around them. We'll get the wind right this time. We'll come in. We did all that.
Was we tried to we wanted to dope the wind, and we got around. We found that new trail that went down.
That's true. Oh, and then it went up and over the ridge by the river again.
Yep.
But I never got to get nice and close like the other days we got in. So that was the day I was like, you know what? We need to start just chasing these things. We need to try to get in on them quicker and not try to overthink things. I think we were overthinking a little bit the first couple days. So. Yeah. And third night, we actually made a smart decision. The third night, we made a smart decision, and we decided that we were just going to relax and try and catch up a little bit on sleep. Oh, that's right.
We were pretty tired.
Exhausted. Yeah,
and
that's right.
We said, you know
what?
We're
getting up at 4 a.m.
and hunting till
and it stays
9.
light until 8:30, and it takes 45 minutes to get back. So we're going to bed at 11 and getting up at 4.
Yeah. So we said we were the next night. We just said no. We're just going to stay in the camp. We're going to call our kids and our significant others and check in on them. And so then the next morning, what I remember was it was my turn to shoot, and my brilliant idea was we kept coming across them in the parks.
Oh, yeah, it was this bike day. Yes.
So, and we had realized there was a trail off the main road, and we were going to drop off on the trail and then cut across to the parks. Then every morning we were in there, we were up above the elk on where we could park our truck. And we could take the truck further down, but we found a nice little place where you could park the truck, and it seems like that's where the elk were bugling. And we got on the road, and we walked the road, and we could hear them bugling all the way. And as we walked the road, I even saw a cow walking across the park. As we got close to this trail, it kicked down right by the parks. And I saw the cow go by, and then we heard a bugle right out of the park. And so I was thinking we were making the right decision, because we kept thinking these elk moved down, and before we had gone in there and heard the elk bugle, and they all dropped out of the bottom, and we could never catch up with them. So we went down this trail, and I thought we'd go down this trail, and we decided we would take the night off, get a lot of sleep, and then we woke up an hour early, and we went in there with our headlamps on, and we walked in the pitch dark all the way down that road. Got to the trail in the pitch dark, and then actually went through the brush in the pitch dark and got into those parks in the pitch dark. And we were in a perfect spot, and the elk weren't in that park. And we sat there for a second, and then we heard an elk bugle, and the elk bugle was up over the park.
Not much.
So we started going, oh my, well, we were thinking, well, we're so early that they haven't made it to the park yet. So we walked through the park and got up. And there's a whole series of parks. So we were like kind of in the middle park, and there was still an upper park above us. So we walked up that park and got up to the top, and I was bugling straight west, where we heard the last bugle. And then we heard this kind of sing-songy, whiny bugle to our left. And we're like, okay, well, maybe, well, that's a bull, right? So then we kind of turned our attention towards that sound, and we slowly dropped off that ridge and went up there, and Cal called a little bit more, and he made a pretty impressive chuckle.
He did.
He made a pretty impressive chuckle and a pretty impressive bugle. So we thought, well, this might be a decent satellite. So we went up the ridge, and I was about halfway up the ridge, and then Dale stopped me and said, elk. And I had to like sidestep you a couple steps, and you were already on them, and you're like 85 yards. I'm like, what is it? And I said, is it a bull? And then you said spike. And I looked at him, and I could see that he had something coming off his head. And he turned sideways.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it was like a spike by 2.
I think it was a spike and maybe a 2-point on one side. He was a little bit bigger than a spike, but not much. When he was looking straight at me, I got to go ahead and pick my binoculars up. I knew he was not a shooter. So I pulled up my binoculars and looked and confirmed, yes, it looks like a spike when he was looking straight on. As he turned to kind of walk away, I saw a little bit of a branch on the back, so maybe a 2-point. But yeah, it was just, he was not a shooter for sure. We had plenty of time. We could have taken an 85-yard pot shot, but we're not going to do that this time of year. Yeah, it was exciting to actually see an elk and get one within range. I mean, muzzleloader or a rifle, he'd have been down for sure. But yeah, he was too small, but man, he sounded more impressive than I ever thought a spike would sound. Spike,
yeah, oh my goodness, yes.
Yeah, he fooled both of us because we were like, well, there's got to be another elk around here, but there was nothing else.
I did not know a spike could bugle quite like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a little lesson learned on my part.
Sure.
So then I think what we did the rest of that time is we went back and we kind of explored the area more.
Mm-hmm.
We went down the parks.
Mm-hmm.
And we called quite a bit, and then we looked on Onyx. We saw some broken up territory. We went across the broken up territory, and we heard, I think we were probably jumping elk or getting close to elk. We could cow call, and you'd hear sticks break in front of you. And I think that was the morning, the first morning when that big grunting, I guess, it was just a grunt. That big bull that grunted at us.
The huge bull.
We had coyotes that went off, sounded off, and kind of, it seemed like it confused him or made him want to shut up.
Check out the footage when Josh was going into the hills chasing that bull. When we decided to leave our stand, he wasn't coming in. Let's go chase him. And I got a good footage of the bull bugling, and then right after that, there's coyotes, and there were coyotes going off. I guess the coyotes just didn't like our bugles, or they were liking them. I don't know, but they went off, and I kind of think that and the wind screwed up that opportunity on that big bull.
Yeah, the bull was just like, all of a sudden he kind of like quit bugling because the coyotes were going off. Well, that day we were walking through there, and we heard what we at first I thought it was a coyote, but then I listened to it, and I'm pretty sure it was a wolf.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
His howl was long and drawn out, and it sounded
lower. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It had a lot more throat to it.
Mm-hmm.
So that day we heard some wolves, and we thought, okay, well, that may have we heard some elk kind of walking around, but they weren't being vocal, and the wolves were howling. We're like, well, that might be what that's about. But again, it kind of confirmed once again that down low, these elk were going down the ridge, down low, and we knew that it wasn't too far away from there was the river, and we knew that the slopes leading down to the river was where we heard the bull on the scouting day before season opened. So we started thinking, wow, these elk really they go down way low, and they were kind of trapped there because there was a road below that went out across the river, and we had a trail that we were walking on. So we're like, where are these elk going? Like they have to cross the trail, and then they have to go up onto this black timber ridge that was the only way you could get there is cross the river or hike way into it. And we're like, well, these elk must be going there.
And the ridge is like this. I mean, it's like
straight up and down.
We ended up being on there a couple times, and you just look down, and it's like you better hold on to trees if you're going to try to go down to that thing, and that's why they were there.
So we then thought, well, that morning was like, I think we got down to the bottom of it after seeing that spike, and it was like 9 o'clock in the morning, and we said, well, that bull was like 9:30, 10 o'clock that bugled on the scouting day, the day before the opener. Like, let's hike back up to the truck, and let's drive down there, and let's see if we can get a bull to bugle. and confirm our theory. Our theory is the elk go down, and they hook, and they get on this ridge where the only way you get to them is you have to cross a big, big river. So we hopped in the truck, and we drove down there, and we drove, to the first point, right by where we were hunting, and hopped out and bugled, and got an answer right away. It was like, okay. that's what they're doing, right? And then just to try and confirm it, we just kept driving down the road, and anywhere we'd find a pull off, we'd pull off, and it's 10 o'clock in the morning, and we bugle, and there'd be a bull would answer. And all these ridges, what they had in common were there were no roads around them, and they all were straight up and down, and they all went right to the river, where a guy would have to put on waders or a raft, or just wade across
a huge river. Two or three little river.
Yeah, two or 3 foot deep river by 70, 100-yard river to get over to that spot. So the elk had figured out, like, I go here, no one bothers with me. So Friday, we were worried. We had an idea of going in and circling around, getting into the parks before the elk. So we waked up super early, walked in the dark with headlamps on, got down into the parks. And once we got into the parks, it was still dark, and we heard a bull bugling way to the west of us. Backed out of that, went back to the trail, and we thought, well, all in the past, all the elk had dropped out. And we had figured out that the bull was bugling, and the elk were seeming to hook down to the bottom and go to this steep ridge where the river was at, where there was no roads to it. So we went down and walked the trail and then cut across to this park that went all the way up to the top, where we could get to the top of this ridge that was secluded behind the river. And we walked through this, and we saw a wallow there. I'm like, oh, remember that. We marked that wallow. We went up to the top, and as we were walking through this park, we could hear a herd bull coming through, pushing his herd. And we heard him bugle twice, and we're like, oh my goodness, he's going to come, just like we said, like right to this, because the only other place he could go was cross right through a major campground. We knew he wasn't going to do that. And the only other place he could go is right where we'd heard the bull bugle. So we went up to the top of that ridge, and we sat up there just waiting and waiting and waiting, expecting to have this herd come by any second. Never heard him. I heard some glunking. I heard some sticks break. We got into a whole bunch of deer on top of that ridge, but nothing. The elk never came through. We bugled. They never answered. Nothing. So then we figured, well, we got a wallow. We backed out, and we're going to go sit that wallow for the night. So then that afternoon we come back, and we realize, well, we're going to come in from the bottom because it's a lot shorter than coming in from the top to get there. But there was a river, and we're walking the river back and forth. And this is a river that feeds a great big river, but still, it's a decent sized river, and it's like a foot to 2 foot deep, and
not a foot and a half for
50, 60 yards wide. And so we ended up, Dale has a pair of waders. I don't have any waders. And I kept thinking I was just going to cross the river. And I started looking, I'm like, man, I'm going to be knee deep in water and soaking wet, and all my boots are going to get wet. There's no way. I'm going to just be soaking wet for the rest of the night. So Dale put on his waders, walked across, came back over, found a place, threw me the waders. I put them on. I walked across, we had to go hide the waders. So kind of a big ordeal just to get across the river.
15 minutes ordeal.
Then we hiked probably 20-30 minutes up the trail, and 20-30 minutes into the park. And we sat in this park, and we built this awesome little blind that you'll see on the footage. And we're sitting there, and the mosquitoes are just eating us alive.
Yeah, they were.
Oh, because we're right on these cattails, and there's a wallow there, and there's water, and that's, you know, what elk like, but also that's what mosquitoes like. So we're sitting there swatting the mosquitoes, trying not to swat them too much. We had a nice buck that walked in for a second. He spooked out.
I will say, when you're sitting in a park and you get bored after about an hour of no action, make sure when you're messing with your phone or your camera and looking at your footage, you look up every once in a while, because I caught a glimpse of the 4-point buck going through there, but we both missed him, so that's bad on us. So that's a good lesson, is when you're in the blind and you're messing with your device and your phone or whatever it is, make sure you look up every minute, because he was in and out of there really fast. And if that would have been a bull, I would have been kicking myself.
And then, one of the craziest things I've ever seen ever happen was I started hearing these crazy noises and whooping sounds and feathers flying, and all of a sudden, like, these 4 whooping cranes fly right down right in front of us. I think you have really good video of it. And land right in front of us. And like those things, like I'm used to those things being down like on rivers in the middle of open valleys, not in the mountains. And they land right in the middle of the mountains, right in the middle of this park, right in front of us, and start walking around, acting all weird, making all these weird noises. And they went over to the elk wallow, and they played in the elk wallow, and I don't know what they were doing. They never ate. They just walked around and looked and made all these weird sounds. And then Dale was making some cow calls to try and call in a bull, and they just went nuts.
Just lit up with all their crane noises, and they wouldn't stop. They didn't stop till they left.
They were crazy sounding. So we got some funny footage of that.
Check that out.
And then they finally flew out. And we're like, okay, and now it's getting pretty dark. And so we're cow calling and bugling every once in a while, and all of a sudden, a bull lights up on that hill, right coming down on that backside of where we thought all the elk went. And sure enough, this bull lights up, and we could hear him, and we kept calling him, and he just circled the whole, like, half the park. As he would keep answering, and he'd just keep circling the park and circling the park.
Getting a little closer, a little closer.
And then it just gets so dark, like you're checking your pins on your bow, and you realize, like, I have like 3 minutes left, and I can't even see my pins anymore. And he finally hits the bottom of the park, and he just stops. He does not come in. I think he was just waiting there. He wanted to see it. He wanted to see the elk he was hearing before he'd walk into the park, and he also wanted to wait until it was pitch black before he'd walk into the park. So he was smart. He just would not do anything. And then after that, you know, we were good 30 minutes and back on the trees to get to a trail. So you turn on your headlamp and you're walking through a pitch black for 30 minutes. And it's, if you guys ever done that, like you have a good compass, you have a good Onyx or good GPS, it's still difficult. With the headlamp,
difficult because
it's thick.
You're going through the trees, and what I didn't realize is around here there's a few peaks, and you can kind of keep your bearings in the daylight, you know. And you know I'm going that general direction, and then you have to, like, there's a down tree, and you've got to change your direction here and here and here, and then you can recorrect. At nighttime, when you don't have any visual cues, it's much more difficult. You make one little transition, and it's much more difficult to line back up because we only had, you know, I guess a 400-yard hike back to that little trail that drops us down to the river to the truck. And a couple times we just had to go, all right, let's trust our device because, you know, we're going this direction. I know where it is, but then pretty soon you go back and forth, and all of a sudden you're like, you know, if I'm off just a little bit, I'm going to be walking straight up that hill or straight down the hill, and I'm going to miss the trail. So,
and that's where I actually thought that what I should have done was I should have turned on the track. The Onyx has a like a trail mode or tracker mode where it tracks where you walked in. I wished I would have turned that on to get in when we walked into that park in the daylight. So then when I was walking out, I could take that same path because, as you all know, you can get back to the trail, but you might go through a really horrible, I mean, terrible, there's all kinds of deep holes and marshes and all kinds of stuff that we avoided on the way in, that when the pitch black, if you're not constantly checking your phone and constantly checking your direction, you just drop right off into that, and then trying to recorrect is difficult. So that was my lesson learned was, if you're going to go in some place and know you're going to come out in the dark, and you know a good way to get in, put that tracker mode on, and then just follow that tracker mode on the way out.
Or at least save like 4 or 5 waypoints that you can kind of reline up after you have to make those corrections mid-course.
Yep. So that was our night at the wallow.
Then we had to cross the river again in the dark.
And then in the dark we crossed the river again. And then Saturday. Saturday. So Saturday
sucked.
Oh, Saturday morning. We went back, you know, because you don't leave elk to find elk. So we had a location where the elk were bugling consistently. And we went back to that spot Saturday morning. And we parked the truck, got all loaded up, get ready to go, got on point, sat there and listened, bugled a couple times, and nothing. I mean, nothing was answering whatsoever. And Dale, to Dale's earlier point, we had been on the point, we had been timid, we had been cautious. We're now realizing these elk aren't going to come in. They're not going to call or come to our calls. They're just going to maybe locate bugle at best. So if you heard, you just need to run at it. You need to ambush them. So we were all set to do that, and nothing. And then we hear one really distant bugle way up behind us. So we started like, okay, well, I don't know what else to do. We'll walk the road and keep bugling to see if anything else will answer. And finally, as we were walking the road, there's one trail that goes up, and we heard an elk bugle again, but we knew there was someone camped right on top of that trail.
We'd run across the camp 3 days before, and they'd been up there quite a few days, so we were anticipating that they were actually hunters because it was the middle of the week. And so they had a razor parked up there and a decent camp set up there right at the base of this road that was non-motorized travel, but that little road goes way back up in there. And we're like, well, that's probably, they've kind of claimed that whole area of the mountain, in my opinion.
Yeah, so we kind of felt like we could go up there, but they're probably already on that elk, and let's just keep walking down the trail. And we were used to hearing all the elk below us and the elk going down. So we're like, well, we'll just keep walking the trail and bugling, and we'll hear one of them will pipe off, and we'll go repeat what we had repeated the 4 days previously. And nothing. Absolutely nothing. And so then we decided, well, we'll just keep walking the road, because the road turns into a trail, and the trail goes all the way up to timberline. So we just kept walking and bugling, and nothing and nothing. Next thing we know, we're at the top. We've gone all the way off the road, onto the trail, another couple miles up the trail, all the way to the very, very top. And we're sitting up there, and nothing. Like, we bugled every 300-400 yards.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't believe that we didn't get even a distant answer. Nothing. So we come back to the truck, and we're feeling
That was the day it was 91 degrees in the heat.
It was super. It was crazy hot. So maybe that's what it was. The elk just knew it was hot and didn't want to bugle. That was a miserable day. We came back and just sat down, and then even that night we went out on a really super easy hike, thinking we found some flat land, thinking that we'd just get into some flat land, let it get dark, and bugle and see if something came out in these big parks, and absolutely nothing. We sat down and glassed this gigantic mountain, thinking that we'd see some elk that would come out. I mean, this mountain's gigantic. And we glassed it right till last light, and I didn't even see nothing. So it's, again, like, that whole day was just depressing. You hike and hunt. We hiked 6 miles that day.
I think it was 6.
And didn't hear a peep, nothing. So then we were like, well, what do we do? Do we just go to a completely new area? Do we just, we have plan E we haven't tried yet. We could go to Grizzly Basin. We thought about maybe going there. We didn't know, right? And then ultimately we're like, well, you know what? There was one place where the elk had been bugling pretty consistently. It was super hot. Maybe we just go back there, and it's our last day. It's Sunday morning. Maybe we'll go back there and try. So this morning we're like, okay, we'll just throw all our eggs in one basket, and we'll try once again. So went to the exact same spot again, parked the truck, got all ready, got on our point, and you bugled, and what happened?
Instantly, we got a nice response, probably 300 yards from the truck. So we dove in. It was not quite dark enough for headlamps, but it was really dark, like way too dark to shoot still. But we had decided, since they are being so bugle shy and call shy, that we were just going to run at them as fast as we could in the dark. And so we just went through the trees as fast as we could without falling over. And we got down there, and right away we jumped a deer, and the deer blew its nose at us. That probably screwed us up a little bit. But he would still respond. So check out the video. We did some bugles. Both Josh and I kept trading off, and he was still answering both of us. And I got lucky in that he was closest to me, and Josh was off to the left. I was in the middle. The bow was on the right. And so went ahead and I was like, I'm not stopped. This is our last day. It's our last chance. And we got the last couple days, they shut up in like 20 minutes. So I'm just going to just haul as fast as I can. And it's like, I don't care if I'm tired. I'm not stopping. I'm going to be relentless with this bull. And So he was bugling and we were bugling, and we just kept pursuing and kept getting closer and closer. And a couple times I'd get in there. I think there were 3 different times I got close enough I could hear him walking, but it was so thick, all I could do was hear the sticks or the leaves he was walking in, and I couldn't see him. I came across one more deer that busted, and then I came across a moose with a baby moose. And so I don't think I was like not seeing game, because I was seeing all this other stuff. Later on in the morning I saw another deer, but he was just always out of visible sight. But he would always respond if you give him 4 or 5 minutes. But he was just probably walking nice steady elk pace, which for me and Josh trying to climb up and over these hills was very difficult.
So this bull, when we first heard him in the dark, we guessed that he was probably kind of close to where the parks were at that we've been talking about.
The original parks, yeah.
Where we got the big, gigantic grunting bull was at on the second day, where we jumped the spike or called in the spike the 4th day. So we knew, we figured out the territory. We walked through there and we mapped it and we put on our Onyx. So starting to get familiar with the territory. So we dropped in on this bull in the dark before we could shoot. And by the time we got to him, you could have shot by then.
Yeah, when we got close.
And we were just almost not quite running, but jogging to get to this bull by the time you could shoot. And it's so crazy how elk sound like they're right there, but they're always another 100 yards away from you seeing them.
Yeah, there were several times I came up to a point where I knew he was down below me, and there was a little ravine, and I'd real quick shoot a range. I'm like, he's got to be in this little ravine. I'd shoot a range, so I'd say, okay, that tree's my max distance, and I'd just keep pushing forward, and pretty soon he'd bugle, and he'd be up and over it already. I'm like, good grief, he's hauling. But
so when we first started, you got up on the shooter point, and I dropped back a little bit, and I started calling, and he was chuckling like crazy. Just at the very beginning, that's all he did was just chuckle, and it just felt like we were on top of him. We felt like he was 100 yards away, and I looked up and I could see that you had taken off. That you weren't being fooled by that. You knew that he was still 200 yards away, so you were still heading in the direction of him. So I held back a little bit, and then I moved up. When I moved up to where you were at, you were already down a draw and up the next one. And so I realized that was, and it was kind of open, and I realized that, well, that was kind of an open exposure, and then at that point in time he bugled again. I realized I didn't want to go across that in case he was looking, so I stopped, and then I started calling, and it started working out really good, where I was holding back about 100 yards from where you were doing, and I would call and he would answer, and I could see that you were on him. So I was hoping, what I was thinking was, well, if I hang back 100 yards and I keep calling and he keeps answering, that keeps telling you where he's at, and you can just keep getting right at him and just get close as you can to him. So then I try to just hold back 100 yards from you, and then all of a sudden, like, I realized that 100 yards turned into 200 yards and turned into 300 yards, turned into 500 yards, and you were doing the right thing. You were staying right on him, and I was just not. I was being a little too timid, worried about, because you guys had crossed open parks.
We had.
And all kinds of stuff. And I'd come to
a trail, we crossed the road.
I would come to a park, and I hadn't heard you guys for a while, and I'm like, the last thing I want to do is cross this park if you're right on top of him, and I'm going to walk in this park and I'm going to screw it all up. So I'd wait at a park, and then I'd hear you, and I'd bugle, and I'd hear him bugle, and I realized, oh, he's way past the park. And so then I'd run and catch up. So at one point in time, we finally got back to this trail we've been talking about, and I got to this trail, and I hit this trail, and there was 2 streams there, and I bugle, and I can't hear anything, and the streams are loud. So I climbed up out of that, and I was like, man, I don't know if I'm thinking that bull went down, because everything we've been doing is the elk have been going down. And I'm like, I don't know, but for some reason, and I guess it was just a good guess, I was like, I think I want to go up. So for whatever, it was a bad idea. At the time I thought, this is a bad idea. But I went up, and I got up above the streams where I could hear, and I bugled once, and I heard him sound off, and he was was 1,000 yards away from me,
He was
maybe
up there.
1,500 yards away from me, and I was like, maybe that's a different elk. And then I heard you bugle, and I was like, oh no, that's Dale, and he's on him, and that's the bull he's still chasing, and this thing didn't go down, he went up. So then I was like, oh, so I stopped instantly, I took my backpack off, I took my coat off, I stripped down to my lightest layer of clothing, because I knew, like, I'm in for a hike. And I buckled everything back up, and then I just started as fast as I could. For the next 20 minutes, I hiked as fast as I could hike. And I finally caught up with you, like 5 ridges away. And the whole time I could hear you bugle, I could hear the bull bugle, and at that point in time, you weren't like needing me anymore. Like you were on him, you were bugling him, he was bugling. I didn't have to do that anymore because he turned on the afterburners a little bit.
He did, yeah.
He started moving. So then we're going up like crazy, up, 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 up. And I'm like, I go all the way to the top of a huge hill, and he sounds like 1,000 yards away, and get to the top of the hill, and he sounds like 400 yards away. And I go down that hill, and I go up, and then he sounds like 1,000 yards away, and it just repeats and repeats and repeats, and we're just going over hill after hill. And next thing I know, you guys will see in the video, I'm looking up, and like we're cliffed out, like we have gone all the way up.
Like there's a rock face, and then the hill we were on is right at the base.
We had gone right up to like, and that's not quite timberline, but that's where timberline starts. This bull had led us all the way up to timberline, and that's where I finally caught up with you. And I was like, holy cow, like this bull is like not stopping. But he kept bugling. So
He kept responding.
We could follow him,
And
right?
He never really got, I guess, from me 200 or 300 yards away from me. He was always there, and I think 3 different times I got close enough to him that I could hear him, and I could hear him stepping and walking and breaking branches and rustling through the brush and the leaves and stuff like that. It's like, I gotta see him. I can't believe I can't see him, but I could hear him. And he just hung up just a little bit out of sight, a little bit out of sight, a little bit out of sight. But we didn't stop. We got up on him.
And then soon after we'd hooked up with each other, we came up over the last ridge, and we dropped into this basin, and it's cliffed out, and the trees are. We can look ahead, and we can see the trees stop, because you're basically kind of at a timberline type atmosphere.
A beautiful meadow with some scrub oak, something like that.
And so we're like, okay, well, there's no more trees. It turns into like tundra and timberline here, so he's gonna run out of trees. So we start pushing across, and we bugle, and we hear him, and he's in the last little bunch of trees there's there. And then after that, it just kind of looks like tundra and cliffs. So we're like, okay, he's probably going to bed down there. That's what we kept hoping for, is that he'd find a place to bed down, and then we could slow down a little bit and put a game plan together. So we think he's bedded down right there. So we come together and we talk, and we kind of put a little bit of a game plan together. And Dale kind of takes the low line, I take kind of the middle line, and we start slowly going towards him, and then all of a sudden we start hearing this crazy, horrible sound. It sounds like a nails on a chalkboard, like, and it's like a cow call gone crazy in a vacuum cord. And
it's funny now, but it wasn't funny then.
And the first time we heard it, Dale looked backwards and like, that's a horrible hunter, not knowing what he's doing, like just terrible. And so we start working across this ridge, and we dismiss it immediately, like that's not another bull. We're on the bull. We know where the bull's at. And we start working across this ridge, and I would bugle at the bull, and he'd answer, and then this guy would bugle his horrible bugle at me. And then I'd bugle, and he'd bugle at me before the bull would respond. I'm like, this guy thinks that I'm an elk, and he's bugling that horrible bugle at me, and he's thinking, I guess I'm responding to him? It was horrible. And we're like, and we have pretty good elk calls, but I would maybe think maybe we were real elk, but I would know for sure that's a real elk, and then I would probably had second guessed. I probably would have second guessed, like, that's a real elk up there, and I hear consistently he's answering those calls. Those are probably hunters after him. I would have put that together. But this guy, no, not a clue, right? So we're pushing across this basin, getting closer
And
and
there were
closer to
two
the
guys. It wasn't one guy.
Oh yeah, there were two of them. There were two together.
Because I saw them multiple times,
Well,
which means they should have seen me multiple times.
Yeah, and it was like the perfect storm because we had gone across country through this rugged ass horrible crap, and we end up in this park. There's a trail that leads up to this park. So these guys had taken the easy road and gone up this trail and ended up in this park, and that's where and they had heard all the action, and I'm sure they were excited, but they didn't realize that, like, okay, here's two guys that have been busting their butts for 2.5 hours, chasing this bull all over God's creation. And he went east, he went north, and then he went west. So he made
Josh checked his phone, and it was 2.5 miles in 2.5 hours too. I mean, it was a hike.
Yeah, and up steep, horrible stuff. And we're right on top of them. And I'm guessing, we were joking about this, I'm guessing they probably thought that we had cut in on their action somehow. I don't know. But we were cutting across this hillside, and this guy just won't quit. Like, every single time this bull bugles, and it's just the worst sound ever. You can hear it. And finally, I hopped up on a rock, and I just waved my hands like this until the guy finally saw me. I'm just like, hey guys, guess what? You're 1,000 yards away from this bull. I'm 300 yards away. My buddy's 100 yards away. Stop. Like, stop. And they didn't. They walked right into the middle of the park, right? Right about the time you were closing in on the bull.
That's true. Yep, I tapped on my GoPro, so I got a little bit of video for you to check out. And I come into the basin where this nice park is here. The timber where it stops is here. The ridge that's bare, the tundra type ridge is up there. I'm like, I'm going to get a visual. It's going to be great. And then down below that, I see the two little guys, the two little hunters with their little penny whistle call. And I'm like, this is all happening so fast. And I pull up, I see a deer, and I check with my binoculars. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's a deer. And I confirm with the deer. And I'm like, I'm going to ignore the deer. The elk's down here somewhere. Keep going. I'm going towards his direction. Penny whistle does his little scent bugle. And I see the elk kind of like take off and go, and I finally get a nice visual. He stops, he looks my general direction, or maybe their general direction, because they were in the middle of the park. I was in some timber still. I pop a range, he's 145 yards. I'm like, man, if I had a gun, it'd be all over. I gotta close the distance. And so I wait till he gets out of my sight, till there's trees in the middle, and then I just take off as fast as I can, but still being quiet, to try to get close to an archery distance shot. And I can kind of catch a little glimpse through all the trees, but I'm keeping pine trees between he and I. And all of a sudden I see he's like changing direction. He's going up the hill. I'm like, I got to stop him. So I bugle, and he stops, turns around, and bugles at me. I don't stop. I keep trying to close the distance. I get another couple 20 yards up there. I guess I got 80 to 90 yards from him. Penny whistle kicks off again, and the bull just goes up and over. And you know, I was kind of kicking myself that I didn't take. I've got a pretty nice camera with a decent zoom lens. I probably could have got a nice video for you guys, but I was like, it's archery season. I got to try to close that distance. And he's going up a hill like that. He's walking at a nice steady pace, and I'm going as fast as I can. And I'm dying of cardiac arrest, basically trying to keep up with him. And but I got to see him go up and crest the hill and go over the top. And I think that by that time the guys finally realized what they had done, and then they kind of backed out of the situation.
Finally, thankfully, they realized.
You came over, and we met up, and we started recounting the story, and we just like, kind of chilled out, stripped another layer. We were down to just t-shirts because we're both pouring sweat, and we let the bull chill out a little bit. And I was pretty much done. I was like, that bull's gone. And Josh is Mr. Relentless Hunting. He's like, yeah, let's go up over this hill. Let's just see if we can pick him up again. I was like, all right, I'm cool with that. So we did. We got up there. We climbed up over this hill, got up on top again, and I was thinking, there's no way he's still here, and let out a bugle. And
he answered. He answered twice. Twice he answered. And he was down this little nasty little hole, and we're up on top of the ridge, and I tested the wind, and it was blowing right at him. And we're like, we should circle way down low and come back up. And man, we've been running and gunning for 3 hours by then.
But he wasn't far. I bet he was only 150 yards. He was
just right there.
I think he would have seen us.
He was just right there. So we decided, well, And the wind was swirling a little bit, and we're like, well, I don't know if we'll get it right or not. So we pulled out the elk scent and just sprayed it all over us. And we only went maybe 50 yards. So the wind was swirling, and we thought we could circle back around, but it might not make a difference. So we pulled out the elk scent and just coated ourselves in elk scent. We only went like 50 yards down that ridge, and it was steep. And we were trying not to knock rocks down.
Holding on to branches and not fall.
And we went about 50 yards and stopped. And we had talked about, like, we weren't going to make any calls.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't make any calls. We went about 50 yards down and stopped. And we stood there. We were ranging everything. Just waiting for him, like, because there wasn't much timber. There was timber up above, but there wasn't much timber. Right where he was at was like it was open. And there was timber and open. He was in the timber. And we thought maybe we could see him come out of that. And we sat there and waited and waited. When you could hear something walking.
We heard a little bit of timber breaking when he was walking.
He must have somehow either seen us or smelled us, and he just went. And the only way literally, like, he had 80 yards of trees and then cliffs.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it.
He slipped out somehow.
And it just felt like we could have kept going, but
yeah,
it felt like throwing good after bad.
Well, he never responded again either. So.
Nope, never answered again.
9:30.
So we figured, even if we kept pushing it, he was probably going to quit bugling. So that was pretty epic.
It was awesome. He was big.
Nice big bull.
You'll have to trust me, but he was big.
So that's a good way to end the season. Even if we couldn't get one on the ground,
mm-hmm.
having some awesome experiences like that. And we came into a new area. Didn't know it. Never hunted it before.
Only e-scouted.
And
Josh did a good job picking it.
Picked spot A, B, and C, and found spot A1, I guess, because we didn't go to it till the second day.
Mm-hmm.
But just from bugling and looking and scouting, we're like, well, that's a spot that wasn't really on our radar. And we put it on our radar, and that ended up being the spot we pretty much hunted the whole time, and ultimately got us the closest encounter of the day. So, lots of fun. We will, we'll be back. That's the cool part about Wyoming.
Just one license. You have a little archery. You can add on an archery tag. And so, like we said, job situation changed, schedules changed. So we just came up here and took advantage of this 1 week to try to have some fun and do a little bit of alpine Wyoming hunting, kind of get our experience with that, because we've got this rifle tag. It's the main reason we're up here is we've got a rifle tag that's going to be in October, and it's going to be similar terrains, different unit, but looking at Google Earth, it looks like similar terrain. So I think we've learned quite a bit. There are differences that we've discovered between Wyoming and Colorado that I think we can take some of the stuff that we learned in this trip and apply it to that. But we got guns that are going to shoot 600 or 700 yards instead of 50, so that's going to change the game quite a bit. So we're excited for that. So we'll get some more videos out to you guys how that plays out in October. 2nd through 11th? We're done around the 11th, so probably into October I'll have a video up for you.
And this next weekend, we're going back to Colorado.
We got some muzzleloader tags.
I have archery. Dale's got muzzleloader. I have a muzzleloader cow tag. But and Colorado's on fire right now, so we're changing units and looking at different stuff. So all the new stuff, e-scouting, new area, we're going to apply it all over again.
Yeah.
So we're going to go to a new area this year and try all that out. So that will be coming soon. We're only 4.5 days away from heading back up there.
That's true.
Lots of relentless hunting coming forth.
I'm not even going to clean the camper. I'm just going to say, all right, I'm going to use all this stuff. I'm going to put my bow in storage and grab my muzzleloader. Take off to the Colorado hills instead of Wyoming.
Good time of year, so look forward to much more coming.
All right, thanks guys.